Welcome back to the show. Today I want to share some thoughts with you on who are you influencing? Who are you influencing? You influence people all day long, and so do I. So I'm hoping that some ideas or some concepts or maybe even some stories or quotes are going to share with you how you see this chessboard around me, that every person or every being in your life, every player, every piece in your life impacts the entire game of life. One politician said, "Few will ever have the greatness to bend history itself, but each of us can work to change a small portion of events. It is from numberless diverse acts of courage and belief that human history is shaped. Each time a man stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring those ripples to build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance." Robert Kennedy said those words. There's a very old story where they shared a concept that says sometimes if you want to change a man's mind, you have to change the mind of the man next to him first. Think about that a second. If you look at this chessboard around me, when one piece is moved, it impacts what happens to the next piece in some form or fashion, doesn't it? Because if one piece doesn't move, it doesn't necessarily always allow the next piece to move. For me, at least, I'm becoming more aware of the people in my life and how they're moving and where they're moving. And maybe even more importantly, how I'm moving, what I'm moving, and where I'm moving. Let me kind of divulge a little bit more here. I've been very challenged to share some secrets in a belief system that has been around for a very long time, and the holes in those systems that are hurting a lot of people. But I know that if I make a move, it's going to impact another move, that could impact another move, that could maybe turn out not so good for some people that have their heart and soul in this belief system. So I'm stuck, even today as I tape this show. Do I share? Because I know every piece that I move, again, is going to impact the entire game, is going to impact the entire board. Do I want to do that to the people that believe certain things? A guy named Leo said, don't walk in my head with your dirty feet. Don't walk in my head with your dirty feet. You and I have to be really careful who we allow into our lives. I've said that multiple times on multiple shows, but I guess it's a theme of the programs that I do here, is that you're in charge of the people that you allow into your head. I've worked with people that, in fact, there was a guy that I worked with way back, let me get the year right, in 1985. Yeah, 1985. I'm not going to mention his name, but he indulged in activities on the workplace that were not appropriate. I was very young at the time. I'd say I was probably 19, 20 years old. And I was about 19. And it was very inappropriate, and it was really messing with my head. So I would go to work every day, and that struggle would really get to me because, again, everything he did moved a piece, that moved a piece, that I moved a piece, and it impacted the entire company. It didn't, not necessarily the company, but the store where I was working. So I had to make a choice that once upon a time. I asked my boss if it'd be possible to get a transfer in the same company to a different store because I knew that this guy was impacting me in such a way that it was impacting not only my moves, but the moves of people that were impacted by my moves. Does that make any sense at all? So I had to separate myself, and I still do to this day. I separate myself from people that impact me in ways that are not very healthy for me. Let me say that maybe a different way. There's people in your life that are impacting your moves in ways that are not very healthy. So if there are people that are impacting your moves daily that are not very healthy, then two things must happen. Either you not allow their moves to impact your moves, or then you get them off of the game, you get them off of the board so that they're not impacting you in a negative way at all. Now that's a little heavy to swallow, because some people that are on your board or in your game or in your circle or in your workplace could potentially be there for the long haul. So there's some things that I think that you and I maybe need to do, and that is that you need to create for yourself players, pieces around you that will keep you headed in the right direction. Because the people that are around you, I'd say probably half the people that are around you don't understand the game. Chess is something that at least some people don't understand the rules of the game. Whereby there are other people that are very insightful on the game of chess. And what's interesting about the game of chess is that, like I've said now multiple times on the show, and we'll say till the end of the show, is that every piece impacts the next piece. And by the way, every piece has certain rules that they need to abide by if they're going to play the game properly. Now here's where it gets difficult for me, personally, is there are people around you and me that don't care about the rules of the game. So they make moves that are unethical, they're immoral, and they impact and they upturn the rules of the game so much that you can't effectively play the game. So, for me, I ask myself, do I want to be part of the game that these people are playing because they're choosing not to play by the rules? The older I get them off the board. I don't allow them in my game, my life, my circle, my area of influence, because they're not playing the game the way it should be played. Now think about this in your own life. There are people that you know and I know that are not playing fairly. Maybe they think that they can come to an environment or a relationship and make up their own rules. When the rules are very adamant, they're very clear. There's certain places that people can and cannot go. But you've allowed, and I've allowed people come into our space that don't belong in our space, that impacts our mental state, that gets us off our game in a dramatic way. I'm talking about people that you allow into your life. Rick Warren said one time, "The purpose of influence is to speak up for those who have no influence. It's not about you." In the game of chess, there are certain players that need to move out of the way in order for other pieces of the game to do what they need to do. Sometimes chess players, they sacrifice certain pieces in order to get other pieces to go to a certain place that they need to go. There's certain relationships, in my opinion, that you and I need to set aside in order to win the game. And I'm not talking sacrificing them in an immoral way, but in a way that says, you know what, you're not going in my direction, or you're not paying attention to what's going on around you, and you're causing the whole team to lose. Another example would be, if you're on a sports team, you certainly don't want to allow people on the sports team that don't take winning seriously, that don't get up early to practice, that don't study, that don't master the skill sets that they need to master in order to excel. Life is not that much different than a chess game. But most people walk into life thinking it's checkers and not chess. Somebody once said, "Don't ask me who influenced me. A lion is made up of all the lambs he's digested, and I've been reading all my life." Again, don't ask me who influenced me. A lion is made up of all the lambs he's digested, and I've been reading all my life. There's not really one person that influences you. I had a teacher one time in the 10th grade by the name of Don Everett. Don Everett was really, in my opinion, a cool guy. He had a beard. I thought beards were cool, still do, back then. And he taught us world history and other things. And he took us places in his class that I had never been. he took it because he traveled in his history, in his lifetime. He traveled to a variety of places. And he was able to introduce to us kids some of the ventures that he took over a period of time, along with the criteria that he had to teach as an instructor. And it brought my mind back in the 10th grade to a place that was much broader and wider than it was when I first started his class. And I happen to think that there's a possibility that Don Everett's class impacted me to do things later, much later in life, that I would not have considered if I would not have been exposed to his class and his teaching. What I'm saying is, what you expose yourself to impacts the game that you play later in life. If you set yourself under the instruction of very wise people, it's going to impact your game in a very dramatic way. Whereas if you choose not to surround yourself with wise people, you're going to get into a situation in the chess game of life that you're not going to know what to do, and the opposing player is going to take advantage of that consistently. That's been one of my struggles in my early life, is I did not invest the amount of time necessary in order to master certain skills in order to excel in certain areas. I was lazy at the time, immature, didn't think that I could have potentially learned the stuff that I needed to learn to master certain skill sets. So then I was, the old saying, used and abused over a period of time because I didn't master what was going on around me. T.D. Jakes said one time, when we are placed in a set of circumstances where we have to take initiative and be creative, some of us find it hard to transition. Those people have been trained not to think, but to obey orders. They are slaves to the training, the unconsciously pledging allegiance to the average, and mentally they recite from the manual of mediocrity. You and I are going to get our butts kicked in the chess game of life if you don't understand the rules of the chess game of life. Because there are rules. There are systems in place. And if you don't consider what the other player, the other person is doing that you're dealing with at that time, you're going to lose in the game of life. And believe me, I've lost a lot in the game of life as a result of not understanding the opposing player. And if you and I walk into life thinking that everybody has your best interest at heart, I guarantee you that is not the case. Now that creates another problem. Do you now live your life as not being trusting? Well, I can only tell you from my experience. You understand, as I've said now 100 times on the show, that this is a chess game of life. So there's always an opposing team. There's always an opposing player. So unless you master the skill sets that need to be mastered, then you're going to be run over and you're going to be losing every single game that you play. T.F. Hodge wrote, "Never let the haters steal your flow." Again, never let the haters steal your flow. They can only do so with your permission. In chess, there are some players that come at you all at once. And then there's other chess players that come at you piecemeal. It's really important for you, if you're going to win in the game of life, to get into the head of the player on the other side. And I'll be the first to tell you, one of the best ways to understand that is to read from books about people who've been there and done that. It's not really rocket science, but if you don't invest the time necessary to master from the best, then you're not going to be a master at anything. If you want to learn how to be a welder, you're not going to learn welding by painting pictures. It's just not going to happen. If you're going to learn about the chess game of life, you need to learn from the people who've mastered the chess game of life. It's common sense. Chris Jammy wrote one time, "A sign of power in a man is not only when people follow what he suggests, but also when people make a conscious effort to do the exact opposite of what he suggests." Think about that a minute. Let me share that again. A sign of power in a man is not only when people follow what he suggests, but also when people make a conscious effort to do the exact opposite of what he suggests. And I think oftentimes that when people do the opposite of what people suggest, it goes back to the character of the teacher or the mentor or the manager or the leader at the moment. Because when you and I see the motive behind the person that is trying to teach us something, then it really uncovers, I think, for a lot of us, the why behind what they're doing. And in the chess game of life, when you understand the why of what the opposing player is trying to do to win the game, then you can counter in certain ways and do things in the game that can get you ahead much faster. I could probably talk about that for 3 hours. Chris Jammy said also, most people want so desperately to be an individual, yet they are so easily shaped by the media. You know, there's fashions come and go. There were many years where neckties, the wide neckties were in fashion. Then it went to the skinny neckties. And then when it went back to the wide ties, now it's back to the thin ties again. So the market, the media dictates what you buy. It's like the chess game is, isn't it? I mean, your own relationships are based on that chess game. Sometimes you walk into a relationship assuming that people really are genuine and what you see is what you get. That's kind of sort of probably a dangerous thing to have an assumption of, because that's not always the case. Andy Stanley said one time, loyalty publicly results in leverage privately. Again, loyalty publicly results in leverage privately. In a chess game, oftentimes a good chess player will leverage the players on their team for the teammates to win the game. Think about that a second. They'll move their piece in order to leverage another player to get ahead of them to ultimately win the game. In sports, they call that an assist, whether it's a soccer game or a basketball game or any other game that I'm not familiar with. Some of the games are called an assist. So the one who assists does not get the point or the goal, but they attribute to another individual who gets the goal or the point. There's nothing wrong with somebody who assists, who helps somebody gets a point, because the ultimate goal is to do what? The ultimate goal is to win the game. There's an ancient story in the Bible about a guy named Paul, and Paul had a young student. His name was Timothy. And Timothy was raised by religious people, and he was a younger man. And Timothy was placed in a position of responsibility and leadership around people that were much older than him, who had played the chess game a lot longer than Timothy had ever been breathing. So Timothy was actually a lot intimidated by this, I'll use the term, chess game of life. So Paul saw that, and Paul encouraged Timothy more than once. He says, don't let my paraphrase of Paul's words, don't let your youthfulness intimidate you. Don't let if you want to switch it, don't let the age and the experience of the older folks, the more experienced folks, to intimidate you from doing the right thing and to leverage what Paul taught Timothy to be passed on to a lot of other people. See, everything you do and everything I do impacts other people. Think about that in a minute. Everything you do and everything I do impacts other people. So the people that you hang around on your team, on your chessboard, is really important because it impacts everybody else around you, doesn't it? I'm still learning that. I'm not 21 anymore, as you can probably tell. Paul was adamant about mentoring Timothy, which Timothy went on to mentor hundreds of other people. And maybe some of those people did not know that Timothy's mentor was Paul, but they looked to Timothy for answers. So let me broaden that lens a little bit. Not everybody necessarily needs to know who your mentor is or who your mentors are because they look to you for the answers. You say, John, I don't have a title. I don't have, a whole lot of degrees behind my name. But as Mark Sanborn suggests, that you don't need to have a title to be a leader. What you do need to know is your role on the chessboard of life, and we all have a role on the chessboard of life, and the strengths of the roles of people around you. Imagine if you were able to leverage the strengths of people around you, to influence those strengths of people around you that would dramatically change the outcome of the game. I'm still learning that. I'm still creating environments in my life where I'm leveraging the strengths of other people to suggest that I don't have to reinvent the wheel, because there's been people who've paid the price, who've done what they've done. I had a guest on the show earlier today who's an expert in a certain area. So why should I get up here and talk about this particular area when I'm far from an expert? Why not bring a teammate, a player, another person on the board who's an expert? Duh. Why not bring people into your life that are experts in certain areas? Then you can tap into their wisdom, leverage their experience, leverage their contacts, leverage all the mistakes they've made, use those mistakes as stepping stones, and win the game. I'm just saying that it could dramatically change where you end up right now. I'm dealing with people right now in my own life who, I'll be trying to be polite and discreet. There are people that I'm attempting to mentor who refuse to take counsel from people who've been on the board for a long time, who have played multiple chess games, who've been through life more times than not, and they choose to try to figure it out on their own, and they're constantly falling in the same hole. As one author said, I can't remember the name of the person who wrote it, but they go down the street, the same street, and they fall in the same hole, the same hole, the same hole, dozens and dozens and dozens of times. And they realize that, they don't realize rather, that they keep walking down the same street and falling in the same hole. Until one day, some of them, a minority of them, a few people of them, go down a different street because they realize maybe John had a little common sense and was trying to tell me something that I should have heard 27 times ago. So the people that you place in your life, the people that you allow in your life, impacts your game of life. And your game of life certainly is way different than my game, and my game is way different than your game. If you look at, there's a guy in the Old Testament by the name of Nehemiah. Nehemiah, one of his jobs was to rebuild a city wall. And in that culture, the wall was the protector of the city. We're talking 3,500 years ago. So when Nehemiah decided that he was to rebuild the wall, he realized that he didn't necessarily have the skill sets to do it himself, or could he do it himself? So he chose to recruit people that were specialists and craftsmen in their field in order to do what needed to be done to rebuild this wall. It was the same analogy as a chessboard. He brought people along his team that were really good at certain things. You don't have to be really good at everything. It took me a long time to get that through my thick head, that I don't have to be good at everything to be good in a game, to be good in life. Nobody that I'm aware of that's very successful is good at everything. But they do surround themselves with people that have a little bit of skill set that they need to tap into. But what most folks don't realize, at those people that are really good at some things, a few things, are really horrible at everything else. And that's okay, because they have a skill set, they have a talent, they have an expertise in certain areas. So if you want to win the chess game of life, then what do you need to do? You need to surround yourself with people who have an expertise in just a few areas that you can tap into that will enable you to influence the other players on the team, on the board, and that you will be influenced by the expertise of other people on the team, on the board, in life, that will leverage your opportunities in a way that you cannot imagine. I've done it, I do it, I will continue to do it, because that's a smart thing to do. So if you want to master from the masters, surround yourself with the right people. Make sure they're honest, make sure they're ethical, make sure that they're standing on a solid foundation and not something that's cracked or built on sand. Because if you do that, You'll look around you at the end of the game, and you're going to be the winner. I guarantee it. My name is John Carver. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back real soon.